Hello and welcome. It is August 2026, and recently we have been announced. What was that sentence? Recently, the next set for Revolution Custom Standard, replacing Cliques of Nylon, was announced. Stirrings in Goldport, SGP by Catalyst. This set has been in development for a long time. I really like it, despite the fact that it makes things personally complicated for me in some weird ways. But we're not talking about that today. We're going to go over all the cards that, on my first glance of the set, look like they have what it takes to make it in Revolution Custom Standard. Going to go over not just what cards I expect to be stapled, but what cards I expect to fit into existing decks, and what cards might create new decks of their own. This set is super cool. It is the third rev set to contain colorless mana, and the third rev set to contain Eldrazi, although it's the first rev set to contain both of those things. So let's get started. But first, we have to talk about Cliques of Nylon, because we're going to talk about how the format's going to be different come September. We have to start with the cards that are leaving. Cliques of Nylon had a lot of different cards, not a ton of answers, but a ton of very important threats and enablers that will really change the format with their absence. Most importantly, Ignited Soul. Ignited Soul was really a one-of-a-kind card, a one-mana card that could get you draw 2 triggers, fill in your graveyard, discard triggers, even just combat damage triggers by being a 1-drop with evasion. Really efficiently. As a hybrid card, it fit into a wide variety of decks, blue-black decks, blue-red decks, black-green decks, black-white decks, basically any deck that wanted any part of this card played it eagerly. And with it gone, lots of decks will be feeling that, all the way from Reanimator to like blue-black aggro, but I think the deck that will feel it the most is Looters. We are also losing Demographer, and recently Research Grant was nerfed, so those 3 cards were all from Cliques of Nylon and all very important parts of various looter-type packages. I know Marl will be very sad to see Ignited Soul go. There's still a ton of looters in Rev, between the ones from, especially the ones from Troll Tree are still pretty good, but this is definitely a big blow to that kind of Rev-specific archetype. Also going, so important tokens cards. I have Melon here, although Melon went in a wide variety of white aggro decks because Melon was particularly fearsome alongside stuff like Kitsune Matriarch. We are losing Sparks of a Revolution as another 1-drop that was widely played in token decks. Flags on High, saw play on and off, very strong card, kind of deceptively powerful. EO is a great equalizer. Haven't seen him in a while, but he was a very important top end for certain token decks, and he's going. Tokens, once again, still tons of support, still tons and tons of raise the alarms, but it's going to look a little different without, especially Sparks of a Revolution. Green aggro, which I'm doing green aggro, Naya aggro, a bunch of these decks well supported by Cliques of Nylon. Aspiring Anarchist was kind of the de facto good green aggressive 1-drop, and that's going up the curve. Genotype's Placer was a white aggro card that I always had a soft spot for and put in probably more decks than I should have. Sleeper Insurgent was a card that saw a lot of play for a brief period in Cliques of Nylon's tenure, where it was like part of this mono green aggro deck with a lot of ways to untap it. Istrasian Gentrifiers showed up in red green and Naya aggro decks, just a generically good mid range threat. And Penraf Dispatcher was, I think, the best mid range top end we had. Very strong pull into Naya, 4 mana 4/4 haste that drew cards and cheated on mana. Aggro is still strong, but I think mono red aggro lost comparatively little with the loss of Cliques of Nylon. And it's like green based aggro and white based aggro that really are going to have to find new tools if they're going to catch up to red aggro as the kind of aggro deck you want to run. Sacrifice. There's one really big sacrifice with Cliques of Nylon, and that's Deadly Dispute. But Deadly Dispute was by far our best sack outlet in the format, so losing Deadly Dispute is a huge blow to sacrifice decks of all kinds that widely play this card. It's tearing up Pauper right now. Sacrifice decks would also sometimes play Garen as a good sacrifice kind of value piece, and Serve Again, especially out of the sideboard. I found that Serve Again could be a really annoying card for certain matchups where you kind of slow matchup, but they're planning to kill all your creatures. You bring in a Serve Again. Now, as they kill all your creatures, you get it back. Serve Again also had combo applications. Various control cards. Sorry, various control cards are going. Most importantly, it surprises me that this card flew under the radar for so long. Scandalous revelation, maybe the strongest card in the format right now. Just no one played it for like 8 months, and then someone realized, wait, this card is just busted. Um, Incredibly strong board wipe. That like good against a wide variety of guys, good against control, good against aggro, good against everyone, gains life, kills permanents, draws cards. But that's going. That was a strong pull into control while it was legal. Coup d'etat, one of certainly we have a bunch of 3 damage sweepers in the format. Coup d'etat was one of the less played ones because you had to be exactly Crixus to want it, but it was good. Dormant Monstrosity, a card that I really champion siding in certain control matchups where they side out other creature removal, and you bring in just this card draw engine that eventually becomes a 4/4. That card had some great stuff going on. There was a Bant counters theme in Cliques of Nylon that kind of subtly overlapped with the red-green counter theme in Kitsuo, looting, probably most importantly, Xenoplanar Engineer. As a card draw engine for counters decks, Overbearing Researcher helped protect your cards. Silliman Regrafter was an important one-drop for that deck. Even Severin Sparkmind did something once. The second biggest card being lost from Cliques of Nylon after Ignited Soul gotta be Survivors of the New World. Just a mid-range threat that really did a number on all sorts of matchups. I have 2 other cards that don't specifically work with Survivors of the New World, but just often showed up in the same decks. Charity Match was a kind of an anti-aggro sideboard card if your deck had big creatures. Planned Obsolescence was kind of a off-on removal spell that you saw sometimes, but it survived the New World. That really was a deck in its own right. This kind of green, white, overstated cards deck that just played all the green, white, overstated cards for Megalithic Twiltry, and then probably Husk Forgers and whatever good 2-drop you could find, and then survive the New World so you never ran out of gas. There was important combo cards from Cliques of Nylon. Cryptology was a card that was always waiting in the wings. It was especially important with Zukar because you could search land for lands easily. Cabinet Recruiter and Venture Capitalist, 2 other good tutors that had occasional combo applications. And Gubernatorial Fundraiser, a combo engine. All of these are going and nothing's replacing them. And Tempo. Kind of 3 medium related cards here. Scrapyard Mecha was kind of a deck in and of itself. Low curve, blue, black, evasion deck that really wanted to get 2 evasive creatures on board and start hitting with the Scrapyard Mecha. Also had some graveyard synergies, some artifact synergies. This is a card that I will miss Scrapyard Mecha. This thing had some really interesting applications. Corrupt Congressman, kind of an innocuous looking card. The thing that really made Corrupt Congressman worth thinking about was that we didn't have a lot of great unnerfable 3-drops for a while in Rev. And so Corrupt Congressman ended up being like the 3-drop you would unearth over and over again. And it's a good card if you're doing it over and over and over again. Sleeper Strix was one of the better 1-mana evasive creatures for setting up ninja stuff. Ninjas in particular are going to be looking for a replacement of that. They have the Branch Stalker, the 1-mana 1/1 ninja, but they'd like a second evasive 1-drop, so they're going to be looking around for one. But enough of the past. Let us talk about the future. Specifically, the future of Victorian London. Okay, maybe not like literally the future. Stirrings in Goldport. It has 7 major mechanics in it, 7 like non-evergreen mechanics that are widely used throughout the set. Just going from left to right along the bottom. And Zeppelin Disaster, we see the new mechanic Fragment. To fragment a creature, you create a 1/1 token copy of that creature, and you put a splinter counter on both the original and the token copy, and all the splinter counter means you can't fragment that creature or the token you made again. So kind of a wholesome, blinky, bouncy sort of thing. Revolution obviously is a huge tradition of blinkety, bouncity, make little copies of my creatures, returns to my hand, sacrifice some things, and Fragment is going to play right into that space. There is Investigate. Of course, in this set, there had to be Investigate. If you haven't seen Investigate before, you make a clue token. It's an artifact. You pay 2, and you sacrifice it to draw a card. Not even the first time Investigate's been in Revolution. We also have Eldrazi Scions. These are the young ingenues of the Eldrazi Society. They are 1/1 tokens, and you can sacrifice them to add a colorless mono. Yep, they're pretty strong tokens. They're quite similar to Acolyte tokens, which we also have in Rev right now. There's a couple of very interesting cards that make them. The Void Calls is a batching mechanic that cares if you milled or discarded a card this turn, then the Void has called you. This is we just went over an Ignited Soul. There are a lot of ways to discard cards and a lot of ways to self-mill in Rev right now. So this is actually a very good time to be trying to enable the Void Calls You. And there's Coalition. Coalition goes on creatures, and it's just uh, ability word for whenever this creature attacks with one or more tokens. We do have a lot of ways of making tokens in Rev, and there's a couple Coalition cards I think are worth discussing. Um, then there's two more mechanics still. There's colorless mana. If you look at Inker on the ground, like what's the mechanic here? It's the fact that there's colorless mana symbols in that top right corner. This is a theme that Rev is certainly no stranger to. Um, Forces you to build your mana base, effectively treating colorless as a six color. We have some good colorless producing lands in Rev, although the colorless fixing is still not perfect. We don't have anything as good as like the coalesced lands, which were in Sibiros. And the last mechanic, a really big set, is Misoses. So you look at Lantern in the Dark, which is actually an Eldrazi citizen. Um, you see that it has a Missos here, leagues below. So the way this works, it's kind of anti-adventure. With adventure, you can either cast a spell and then the creature, or just the creature. Here, you can either cast a spell, that's it, or the creature and then the spell. So you can either cast leagues from below from your hand. It won't be a copy. It'll be type sorcery on the stack. It'll go into your graveyard just like any other sorcery. Or you can cast Lantern in the Dark, and then while it's on the battlefield, it's like a prepared spell. You can cast Leagues Below once, and that'll be a copy. I don't know if it's cast from exile or from outside the game or something. That shouldn't really matter. Yeah, obviously, getting two cards in one card, always a recipe for strong cards, and there are quite a few strong Missos cards. So we'll be going through lands, then white, blue, black, red, green, then gold and colorless, and then like actually colorless. So first, starting with the lands, there are. I'm going to start with a bunch of kind of miscellaneous lands, starting with the common colorless sort of tri lands. Here we have Keeper's Peninsula, enters tapped, taps for colorless, white, or blue. Um, this card, yeah, if you're a white blue is actually the most likely two colors you will be. Basically, these if you are two normal colors and colorless at the deck, you'll probably play some number of these as your basically your tri land of that. The crumbling nope coastal tower. That cycle. Basically that cycle but for colorless. There's a limit to how many tap lands you want in your deck, but these are certainly worth thinking about in that context. Promising Vista is another very good enabler for your colorless deck. It enters tapped. When it enters, you may pay 2 life if you do add colorless, and then it has Evolving Wilds text. So, no, sorry, not Evolving Wilds. It gets the basic land untapped, but itself it enters tapped. So this is effectively a land that can produce mana the turn it enters, and it also has all the normal sacrifice, graveyard, shuffle synergy that you expect from a fetch land. Um, it is slightly awkward that it produces colorless mana on your turn only, because a lot of the colorless cards have flash. Colorless kind of overlaps with flash as a theme in this set. So sometimes you really do want to play this and generate mana the turn it comes in, but your opponent's turn. That's slightly awkward, but I think definitely worth playing, even worth considering if you're a lot of colors, including colorless. Reality Cusp is another kind of 5-color colorless land. As it enters, you may choose a color. If you do, it enters tapped and you gain a life. So you can play it just untapped as a colorless land, like a Gilded Court, or you can play it tapped as a land that produces colorless or that color. So I think if you don't care about colorless mana, you're better off with Gilded Court. But if you do care about colorless mana, this is a very effective kind of multicolor land, and the life gain, it's really nice. What Remains of Frost and Hold is a land that taps for colorless, and for 5 mana, it becomes a 4/4 until end of turn. This is a fine creature land, fine to bad creature land, I might say, but it like compare the one in standard right now that's 4 mana becomes a 3/3 permanently. This is a lot worse than that. But if you're colorless, you are going to want to play some number of just untapped colorless lands, and this could easily be one of them. And lastly, this set does have wastes in it. That's important for Promising Vista. It's important for Primal Fissure. That there is basic land wastes. It taps for colorless. That you can get. It doesn't have any basic land types. If you're not familiar with wastes, that's going to be important to building your colorless mana bases because Primal Fissure is really the backbone of your colorless mana base. Uh, oh, Oops, I went forward too there. But in addition to these kind of one-off lands, there's a whole cycle of varying lands at rare. They all enter tapped. They tap for colorless or some color, and they have a sack ability. And all these sack abilities are pretty good. The white one 6 mana. Oh, and also when you sack them, you don't even lose the land. You get a tapped colorless land token that taps for colorless. So basically, it's like inexhaustibility on your land. It doesn't even lose you the land. The white one, 6 mana, 4/4 flying, not bad. The blue one, 4 mana, draw 2, discard 1. Black one, 4 mana, unearth something. Red one, 4 mana, copy your next instant or sorcery. Green one, 4 mana, put 2+1 counters on a creature, gains trample until end of turn. I think the blue and white ones are the most interesting. Typically, you want kind of expensive late game mana sinkish abilities on these lands. The white one being able to make a creature on your opponent's end step, untap, immediately attack them, very threatening. I think the red one's probably the weakest. Once again, if you're like white blue colorless control, which is an archetype that's heavily supported in this set, I think you're quite interested in both the white and blue ones and in the like the white blue colorless tap land. Although at that point you're kind of playing a lot of tap lands. You do have to watch how many tap lands you play, especially because Primal Fissure in a deck that's gonna go into the late game kind of counts as some part of a tap land. You're gonna want those too. Okay, starting off our staples, we're gonna do white first, as I said, and each color we're gonna try to do creatures roughly in mana value order, and then non-creatures. So there's a couple of interesting 2-drops in white. Most interesting probably Bolton Wharf Administrator, 2 mana, 3/2. Each spell a player casts outside of their main phase costs 1 more to cast. The white 2-drop slot is pretty grim right now. It's Hender Revelin or Geist Marshal is I guess the 2-drop you're planning to play in your white-based aggro deck. Those are not as good as the red 2-drops we get right now. And Bolton, I think, is not also not that great. I think it's mostly a sideboard card. It can annoy control decks, although, to be honest, it can't annoy them that hard. Most control decks have 1 mana removal that kills this, so they can still trade evenly with it, or even trade up if they strangle it on their main phase. Scape Surveyor is a 2 mana 1/3 flyer. When it enters, it goes and gets a plains or wastes into your hand and then shuffles. This follows in the footsteps of Contest Coordinator of 2 mana 1/3 that goes and gets you a card. That's a very good stat line, good to blink, good to self bounce. Even has evasion and it can't miss and it has no deck building restrictions. Of course, it doesn't get you selection like Coco does. One of the advantages of Coco is you'll play it and you'll hit a land and a spell, so you get the option of whichever you need. Skip Fair is always a land, but still, hitting your land drops is great. And I think this is like gonna see play all over your kind of value based white decks. Blocks the red aggro creatures quite well. That's nice. Warpware Chassis is a card like I've been talking to like thinking this might actually be do it. It's not really a 2-drop, it's more of a 3-drop. You pay 2 and a white and you get a 1/1 human and you get with equipment attached to it. You have +2/+2 in flying. So 3 mana, 3/3 flyer. That's a completely reasonable stat line. And when the creature dies, you it left behind his equipment, equip 3 for +2/+2 in flying. That is not a bad equipment. That'll win your creature matchups real easily in the late game. Suit up your random 3-drop with this and like sail over all your opponent's blockers. Flying is very good in Rev right now. And it's a little fair, Warpwire Chassis. Maybe if you care about artifacts, if you care about equipment, if you care about tokens, you'll be interested in this card. But it's like not that far off being like a completely constructed legit card. Going up the curve, not many. I'm not going to talk about the 3 here. By the way, if it looks like I'm leaving out a card that you thought I was going to talk about in this section, it might be because I think that card is better talked about in the later section, where I'm going to go deck by deck and talk about cards for specific decks. The staples section is mostly for cards I think are kind of generically playable in any deck of that color, like High Sergeant Liano, a 4 mana 2/3 that comes with 2/1/1s, and whenever it attacks alongside one or more tokens, you draw a card. Now, Survivors of the New World, this is not. Only draws 1 card a turn, has to attack to do that. Does have nice stats. 4 mana for a 2/3 and 2/1/1s. That's very legit stats. The card draw is real nice and not that hard to achieve. It's not going to survive combat that often, but even the first card's real nice. I don't think this is a reason to play a tokens deck, but a completely legit top end for a deck that's already interested in making 2 1/1 human creature tokens. Torvald Iron Eminence is a 5 mana 5/5, got Vigilance of War 2, and on your upkeep you get a +1/+1 counter on each of your creatures. This is probably a little fair compared to the other things you could be doing at 5 mana, like compared to Economicos, which had flying and vigilance and made you a token immediately. Tarvanol is actually probably a good opportunity to say, I am aware of a lot of the buffs and nerfs and changes that are going to be made to this set. I am a Revolution set designer of myself, so I am in the channels and I'm watching these things happen and it's going quite smoothly. This set has been through a lot of field tests and it's real buttery smooth. It's not a ton of things that need to change. But I'm going to try to not talk about things that I think are going to change just because I have insider knowledge and that feels a little unfair. And I try to talk about cards as they are right now. Anyway, Torvald's a little under, but it's on ward 2. That's nice. Eveline, Arc of Salvation, 5 mana vehicle, enters or attacks, gets back a 3 or less mana value artifact or creature. And the creature could even enter tapped and attacking. It's also 6/6 Flying Vigilance, Crew 4. Crew 4 is pretty rough. Like, you really want you need ways to fill your graveyard. You need creatures with 4 power to crew this, so you can keep doing it. It asks a lot of you. If you can enable all the things, this clears Revolt at the Palace, which is its main competition. Trouble is, Revolt at the Palace really asks absolutely nothing of you other than have 3 drops in your deck, and Revolt at the Palace crucially can hit enchantments, such as removal spell enchantments. There is a removal spell artifact in the set, um, but you don't really have a good way of getting in your graveyard, so it's not that great with Eveline. Eveline, card that it's a lot of hoops to jump through. I don't really see the shape of deck that wants this, but there's a lot of power here if you can get there. After the non-creature, the big headliner for that is Never Seen Again. 1 mana for a sorcery. You exile a creature, controller gets a 1/1 Eldrazi Scion. This is certainly 1 mana unconditional removal. That's pretty scary. That's something that we don't see very often. It's really worth talking about. I don't think this card is that strong. I think it will see play. I think it's really a sideboard card for very specific matchups. You want them to have big creatures that you want to specifically exile, not kill. Certain combo decks that have to tap out for a big creature are going to be sad about this, although, sorcery against combo deck, not that good. Certain mid-range decks that you really like. If you're like a white deck and usually most removal doesn't hit them, the main problem with this card is that Fateful Ascent exists 2 mana instead of 1, but also instant and leaves them a much worse token. Fateful Ascent kind of been the de facto thing, kills enchantments and planeswalkers, both of those highly relevant types, especially enchantment. But if the meta shifts, I could easily see it valuing the efficiency of Never Seen Again more. If you are yourselves kind of a mid-range control deck, that's fine, just ignoring that 1/1. Aggro decks are going to be kind of upset to give their opponent a 1/1, which can then chump block. The other white non-creature, Otherworldly Gyre, 1 white white. When it enters, you exile all creatures mana value 2 or less until it leaves the battlefield. This is a nice little anti-aggro sweeper in white. We got anti-aggro sweepers in black and red. Here's a white one. Decks that play only creatures with mana value 2 or less, or a lot of them, are very strong right now. The blue-black ones and the red ones and the white ones and the token Naya ones. And so this is going to be good against a wide variety of decks. Very strong looking sideboard card. I could see decks playing this even that can't activate its second ability for X colorless to go find a colorless card with mana value X or less, exile it, and this becomes a copy of the card. Now, the main problem with that ability is there aren't a lot of good colorless cards in Rev right now. I searched for the ones in Rev right now, and I came up with Magnetling is the best one. That's a little sad. And almost all of the ones in this set either have a cast trigger or an enters trigger. And when you use this ability, you don't get cast triggers or enters triggers. So honestly, I think you're fine kind of ignoring this ability most of the time when you're considering including this card. Moving on to blue. Only a couple creatures I'm considering blue, and there's really one big headliner for blue, which is Malignant Monophage. We're starting to get a critical threshold of good blue tempo creatures being this guy, Frog of Eternal Gloom, the burglar from Valir that turns something into a copy of it. This also turns into copies of it. It's 1 blue for a 2/1 devoid flash, and when it enters, if you cast it, you can turn another spell into a copy of it, except it doesn't have the following abilities. So basically, it's 1 blue baseline case, 1 blue, you counter a spell, and then you get a 2/1 and they get a 2/1. Both of your 2/1s are devoid, but yours has protection from theirs. Yeah. Takes a lot to play a 3 mana counterspell these days, but this is, I think, a really interesting variant on 3 mana counterspell in a deck that is looking to be aggressive, looking to attack. Do note, despite what the art looks like, it does not have flying. It's keyword not flying. Bane's card is competing on for its slot is Frog of Eternal Gloom. I think this blue tempo thing, possibly with ninjas maybe, it's getting there a little. You could also cast this targeting your own spells, like you could discern and then respond with Malignant Monophage to turn your discern into a copy of it. That's something, that's cool. You end up with a discern on the battlefield that's a copy of this, which is a little weird. Yeah, I think blue tempo, I think, is currently missing an unfair card. Like, a lot of other decks have unfair cards. Blue tempo kind of has a bunch of good fair cards. But if we can find that unfair card, Malignant Monophage could be right there. Aviary Theory, it's just a random common. It's a 2 and a blue for a 2/3 flying. And when it enters, you surveil one. That's like not terrible stats. And it's also a negate for 3 mana. I don't think this quite gets there, but it's like surprisingly close for random 3 mana common creature. And last blue card I want to talk about for the creatures is Scion of Insanity. 5 mana 4 for flying. And if 30 or fewer cards in your deck, it's a 7/7 flying. That's not that impressive, but it does have 1 and a blue, discard it to mill 3, then draw 1, then shuffle this into your library. So if you're really interested in self mill and you don't mind having like a 5 mana 7/7 flyer, which is not a great body, but kind of thrown in for free on your instant speed cantrip, I could see this happening. I think we have a lot of really great ways to A, cantrip, and B, mill ourselves right now. So this doesn't quite get there. But if you have reasons to care about your cards being 5 mana creatures with flying, even your cantrips, this could be a thing. Uh, Big smattering of blue non-creatures here. Wiped Clean is a 2 mana flash aura, enchants a non-land permanent. If you spent colorless to cast it, you counter all activated and triggered abilities of permanent, and it loses all abilities. I think you could play this in decks that can't even pay the colorless, but always better if you can. This is kind of like a side grade to Golden Bloom of the Silenced in your sideboards against annoying artifacts, enchantments, and planeswalkers. Basically, you can. It's like Golden Bloom of the Silenced. It doesn't turn off all of them, but it isn't legendary and it does have flash. Those are both big upsides for kind of destroy target artifact, enchantment, or planeswalker, which is basically what this does. Spill the Beans is a reprint from Secrets of River City. 1 and a blue, instant draw card. Investigate, same as cannon card Deduce. This is a perfectly fine card. I think Deduce saw some actual cannon play. Trouble is, in Rev right now, we have Discern. This card is not as good as Discern. Discern's a really good card. So yeah, you'll play Discern instead unless you really care about Investigate for some reason. And also we have Fade, 1 and a blue instant, bounce a non-land permanent and investigate. This card is, I believe, in MSEM, and it sees regular play in MSEM, where I will not underestimate this card, certainly. It gets you the card back. It's like an Into the Royal, but you don't have to kick it right now. You can pay the kicker later when you feel like it, and that's a real big difference. I think this is a kind of go-to if you're interested in a bounce spell. We do have 2 really good bounce spells in Rev already. There's the Battle, which is 1 mana, and there's Dream Snare, which can draw you a card a lot of the time. Neither of those can hit non-creature, non-lands, so Fade has that advantage. It also has Harry Dubois on it. That's really nice. Yeah, good, generically playable bounce spell for all sorts of tempo-ish applications. 2 good card draw spells in the set versus Collaborate, 2 and a blue. You look at your top 3, 2 of them go in your hand, 1 in your graveyard. That's a pretty good, 3 mana, draw 2 selection. It's like Stock Up if it looked at 2 fewer cards. Okay, Stock Up's pretty good. Maybe if it looked at 4 cards, I'd be considering it. It's 3, even putting 1 into the graveyard. I don't know, that's quite enough. Um, I think the main problem with this card right now is Discern. Discern also draws 2 cards, but a lot more flexibly, instant speed. I think most decks are going to max out on Discerns and they not really need this. Scour the Records, though, I think this is a legitimately interesting one. 4 mana, look at your top 4, put 2 in your hand, rest in the bottom of your library. But if there's 7 cards in your graveyard, and that's not that hard to achieve with a lot of the Sought Scour stuff we have going on, instead you look at your top 7 and put 2 in your hand, rest in your graveyard. You really get a full dig through time. Yeah, we don't really have a 4 mana instant speed card draw spell that's widely playable. There's Nether Invocation, that's blue black, and it's more of a removal spell. There's 3 Become 1, that's very strong, but it's 5 mana. It's been a while since control decks and Rev have really been interested in just straight up 4 mana, draw some cards, and nothing else. But if you're gonna do that, this is a very good option for that slot. In black, starting off the creature curve with Haunted Starlet, 1 to black for a 1/2 lifelink. Always love to see a little lifelink with red aggro running around. And whenever another creature you control with power 2 or less enters, you lose a life and you get an Andrali Scion. So it is very not hard to build a deck that's going to get a Scion off of this every single turn. Creatures with power 2 or less, that's most of them. It counts other tokens. You make tokens when you make tokens. It triggers on your opponent's turn too. So you flash in your Resolute Reinforcements. You get a token. You get another token. Very good source of lots of tokens. Ramps you a little. All of that's very nice. We have kind of another. This is kind of a second version of this effect because we also have Forsaken Penitence. Whenever a token you control enters, create a token. That one doesn't have lifelink. and it makes a slightly worse token, I think, but it does trigger off non-creature tokens. Um, so yeah, if you really wanted to make tokens when you make tokens, and then token your token, we now have two copies of that effect. We haven't yet found the reason to do this. Maybe it's some kind of sacrifice thing, although without Deadly Dispute it's a little harder. Maybe it's just some kind of aggro thing. Maybe we care about Scion Typal. But this is certainly right there. It has some potential in here, certainly. And Lifelink, I do not underestimate even a 1-2 with Lifelink. That little bit of life really helps. Also with Lifelink, Val Reef Inquisitor. 3 mana, 3/3 Lifelink. That's a nice stat line. Whenever another non token creature you control dies, you investigate and lose a life, and you can sack 3 clues to go Demonic Tutor for a card. You have to have some ways to make other non-token creatures you control die, so there's clearly some kind of aristocracy, sacrificey, small creature-y thing. But we certainly have a lot of interesting support for that, a lot of good cards for that. And the body on this is not bad. Could slot in right next to Siren in your black-white sacrifice deck. A sideboard option for black, Strike Suppressor. 3 mana 2/3. When it enters, all other creatures get -1/-1/-1 until end turn. And whenever your opponent creates a creature token, they lose a life and you gain a life. We used to have this card called Looming Psyhawk in Rev, and it was pretty rough. It stopped your opponent from creating any tokens at all. That card was widely played in sideboards. It was a really key part of the meta. Strange Brother is not as good as Looming Psyhawk. They can still make tokens. They'll just have to pay some life for it. And it doesn't do anything about non-creature tokens, which are really a lot of the tokens people are making these days are non-creature tokens. But I think it's still a perfectly reasonable sideboard card for your black decks, especially if you're interested in the creature body, ways to nerf it, stuff like that. Go up the curve. There's a really interesting card here in Soulflame Immolator. 2 black for a 4/4 flying. Ward pay 4 life. That's a reasonable stat line. And you can pay X life to fragment a non-token creature you control with mana value X. So I think this is another black 4-drop in there. We have a lot of really good black 4-drops between Nightfall, Life Hacker. Once you get into green, you got the Meteor, Hellion. A lot of choices for the black 4-mana slot. If your opponent's not pressuring your life total, and so you have all the life to spend, you can put this down, fragment like an Exorcist of Errors. That's a pretty good card to fragment. Fragment your life hackers. Fragment your Huskforger acolytes. Even those are nice. Yeah, very reasonable mid-range top-end threat. Very good with lots of other creatures, both because it needs other creatures to do anything, and also because you kind of want ways to draw out your opponent's removal so they don't have the removal spell for this, and you want to pressure their life so the ward pay for life is a little tougher on them. Definitely a card I'm going to test out. Black non-creatures, quick and painful, 1 black instant, destroy a creature with power 3 less, or if the void called this turn. We got like 3 of these in Rev right now. There's even the one from Kitsuo that cares about if you sacrifice a permanent this turn. Hang cares about if you control a 3 mana value permanent. Sovereign Execution costs you life unless you got life loss or life gain cards. This one, if you're milling or discarding cards, you'll play quick and painful. Like if you have Sot Scour in your deck, this is probably the one you want to play over Hang or Sovereign's Execution or Dragons of the Dark. Yeah, we have lots of options. I think it'll be pretty clear which one you want for which deck. And last black card to talk about, Phasmless Invocations, plural even. This is a really interesting card. So 6 mana, starting with you until our modes are chosen. Each player choose one that haven't chosen. So you can choose that player with 7 life, discard their hand, exile all bottom 6 cards, or create a 10/10. So the way this works is you get to choose. Wait, think about it. You get to pick one that you get, and you get to pick one that your opponent has to get, and your opponent gets to pick which of the last 2 they get, and you get the last one left over. So, things that are interesting about this. If your opponent's at 7 life, this kills them. You choose some option other than lose 7 life, they choose an option. You choose an option other than lose 7 life, they have to choose lose 7 life, they lose 7 life, they die. It doesn't matter what the other options did because they're dead. That's nice. Other option, you're playing against control, you can force them to pick either option 2 or 3. So if they have lots of cards in hand, you can force them to discard their hand, or if they are taking a while to kill you, you can force them to exile all but the bottom 6 cards of their library. Now, they may end up with a 10/10 and you might discard your hand, but if you are like prepared to do those things, you can get some value off of this. The way you probably pick you lose 7 life, and they'd probably pick they give you a 10/10, and then you'd say, okay, I'll discard my hand, you exile your bottom cards. Maybe that wins you the control mirror. Of course, it's a 6-mana sorcery, it's hard to resolve in a control mirror. I think the main use case for this is if you're interested in 6 mana, deal 7 damage to your opponent, which there are decks in this format that are possibly mean enough to want that. On to red. Red aggro has really been the story of the Valir in Istrad's season, and so more cards for red aggro are always interesting. Although they got a lot of very tough slots to fill. At 2 mana, the red 2 drops right now are pretty good, but there's a contender here in Bloodbone Pietist. 2 mana 2/2. Whenever it hits your opponent, you mill a card and you can play it this turn, and you can play 2 in a red and discard a card to give it +2/+2 and make a creature unable to block. Of course, if you do that, you'll probably get to trigger the first ability. Probably won't be able to play the card you milled if it's a non-land, because you spent 3 mana on this. I would compare this to something like Cash Thrasher. The body is worse, no evasion, no haste, but if you can get in, the cards, you get them at a much better rate than Cash Thrasher. You don't have to pay 2 extra per card, you just get to play them for their mana cost. I think this is a really swingy card. If you can get it in, you can snowball your opponent really easily, but it's going to get stonewalled pretty easily as well, and you don't really want to activate that last ability too often. I think, if you're slightly less aggressive red, which hasn't been the way you want to build red these days, but if you're slightly less aggressive, so you don't really want Rose on Firebrand, Cash Thrasher, you want a more value-oriented red 2-drop, maybe you're playing Burning Shigana Manor, then you play this one instead, maybe. Ichor Winnower is a really weird one. 2 mana 2/2, I'll draw the Cleric. It's got first strike. Oh, Devoid. By the way, I didn't even go over Devoid. Went over the 7 mechanics in the set. But Devoid is also legally a mechanic. It means that this card has no color. Anyways, Ichor Winnower, the 2 mana 2/2 first strike, decent stats. And whenever opponent casts a spell of even mana value, it deals 1 damage to them. That's probably like slightly less than half their spells, because most spells cost 1, 2, or 3, and you hit 2, but you don't hit 1 or 3. It'd be better if it was odd, I think, weirdly. Yeah, it's gonna ding them for a little. It's kind of playing the same role that Flaw in the System used to play, that card's rotating. I think this card's probably a little too fair, a little too small ball to see play in the red decks that are looking to deal damage to their opponent, but it's certainly annoying. Death Score and Apostle is a really weird one. 3 mana, 3/2 menace. Whenever it attacks, you can draw a card. If you do, you discard 2 cards beginning the next end step. So basically, you want to do this while your hand is empty. You'll draw your card, you'll play it, and you won't have to discard any cards. This is competing for its slot with Profane Invoker, another card which really wants you to have an empty hand and draws you card. That one has haste. I think haste is more important than menace. So I think currently Profane Invoker kind of clears this card, but it's interesting at least. It's a cool design. Um, Going kind of okay, up and down the curve in weird directions. Steel Soul Ignition, kind of a humble looking 1-drop. 1 mana sorcery, you get a 1/1 artifact token, and you can give one of your creatures +1/+0 haste. So you can play it as a 2/1 haste that then becomes a 1/1 subsequent turns, or you can play another creature, then play this, give your bigger creature +1/+0 haste. It's kind of a humble looking card, but it reminds me of stuff like Spark Through Revolution, the recently nerfed Emblazoned Prophet, with Prophet being nerfed, Sparks rotating. The red decks are kind of looking for another good 1-drop to put in their 1-drop slot, and I think it could easily be this one. There aren't a lot of other contenders for the 1-drop slot, and you do want some number of 1-drops in your red aggro deck. Another 1-drop you play, Warcurse Ruminant. It's not Ignited Soul, but it might have to do. 1 mana, 1/1 haste. When it dies, you can rummage. This card looks humble, but it's exactly the kind of card I always underestimate. It's a 1 mana 1/1 with haste, and it just does a little something. A little card filtering. It draws your second card, it discards the card, it fills your graveyard, it's an artifact. It just so many little things that are reasons you might want to play this card. I could see those adding up to being playable. Then like the 3-drop I wanted to throw in here. Tormented Eulogist is a 3 mana 0/3 with haste. Whenever it attacks, its base power becomes equal to the amount of mana you spent to cast this turn. So it's a 3 mana 3/3 haste. If you can spend more mana turn to turn, it can be a little bigger than that. I think our current best 3 mana 3/3 haste is Brazen Burglar. Once again, I think Brazen Burglar probably clears this card. But once again, kind of interesting, especially if you're going to start going really big up the curve. Not a ton of burn in this set, kind of 2 main burn spells worth considering. In Eldritch Flame is a 3 mana instant that deals 2 damage to each creature. We have a lot of 3 mana instants that deal 2 damage to each creature in Rev right now. I think the one you play most often is Star Squall. But if this one exiles all creatures that would die this turn, which if sacrifice / Death Trigger decks come back as a big thing, I could see wanting this one instead of Star Squall. But I think it's Star Squall by default. And Flame Rush, it's an instant, deals 2 damage, divide you choose 1 or 2 target creatures. Kind of a side grade to Blade Flourish. It can't hit face, that's important, but it can kill 2 1/1s, which is a huge deal. Boy, we do have a lot of cards that make 2 1/1s, and so killing them efficiently is something really nice to see. I think in your most aggressive decks, you'll play Blade first because hitting face is important. But in your less aggressive decks, maybe I think this is the default control shock of choice. Because control doesn't really care about hitting face, although it can't hit battles. And clearing 2/1 is very important for control. And that's kind of all the burn for the set. But there's some interesting kind of card draw. The big one is a World We're Fighting For. This is a really weird card. 2 mana enchantment. Whenever you cast your first creature spell, you get a heart counter on it. Non-creature spells get you soul counters, and you can remove one of each to exile the top card of your library. You can play it this turn only. So, what do you want to? What kind of deck do you want this in? Well, you want to be playing a lot of spells, and you want them to be cheap. Impulse Darling, this is better when you have cheap cards, and your cards are better when you have cheap cards. So this is, but you also don't want to be super aggressive, or I mean, partially. I could see this being a sideboard card for an aggro deck. Like normally you'd side in something like Crumbling Tower. I think this is a good alternative to Crumbling Tower if you're this very low curve deck. I could also do something like Blue Red's Prowess, wanting that that's a deck of a good mix of creatures and non-creatures, and it casts a lot of cantrips. Cantrips, of course, are great when you want to get a lot of cast spell triggers. Cards like Red Hot Rider work well with that. That's a creature that gets you more spells to cast. Basically, if your spells draw you cards, this lets your spells that draw you cards draw you even more cards. Which is something you might be interested in if you convert drawing a bunch of cards into your opponent being dead, either through like looters slash prowess slash um, uh, terrors things, or through just those spells being burn and aggressive creatures. Neon Dreams and the sorcery. 1 mana, you discard a card, and you exile the top card of your library. Play them this turn only is the unfortunate part. So if you hit 2 lands, you're screwed. If you hit two like 3 drops, you're kind of screwed. I think that level of inconsistency kind of brings this out of contention. But any 1 mana card that can look at 2 cards and maybe let you play them, it has some potential at least. Moving on to green. 2 green, 1 drop worth considering. Eccentric Geneticist is a kind of green, mid-range-ish 1 drop. 1 mana, 1/1. If you have a 2 drop in play, it becomes a 1/2/2. Becomes a 3/3 with Vigilance with your 4 drop, and a 4/4 Vigilance Trample. I'd compare this to a Rochi Soulfang, which is also a 1 drop that gets bigger as you play bigger creatures. Advantage of Soulfang, I think it gets bigger a little faster. Like it's going to get +1/+1 off your 2 drop, and then +1/+1 off your 3 drop. So if you curve out, Soulfang is going to be the bigger one. But Geneticist is better if you top deck it, as long as you still have a board. Geneticist seems pretty tame to me. I think like 1 mana 2/2. You're not really like getting out of bed for that these days. 1 mana 3/3 Vigilance. That's something, but if you have to wait until turn 4 and have a 4 drop and have the 4 drop live for that, it's still kind of a hoop to jump through. And the 4/4, I don't think decks that plays are going to play 6 mana creatures very often. But yeah, very cool design. I think, is this going to make green aggro a thing again? No. Wreckage Inquisitors is a 1 mana 1/2 when it enters you investigate. If you're kind of a value-oriented green deck that wants cheap creatures, you didn't have great options. You had Cetral Arborist. Now you got this one. Better than Super User, probably. There's a known quantity from Standard of like Novice / Thraben Inspector. And we know this card is good. We know this card is good. Bounce it, blink it, block with it, put plus and counters and equipment on it. Triggers all your token making stuff, etc., etc. Lots of synergy anchors for this. I have Husk Forger here just to remind you that like the reason green 1 drops are under a lot of scrutiny is because like you could play a green aggro deck with an aggressive 1 drop into an aggressive 2 drop, or you could play a green deck that wants to play Husk Forger in turn 1 and skip right to the 3 drops. And the way green's looking right now in Rev, the 1 drops and 2 drops are not inspiring me. The 3 drops are, and so the Husk Forger plan, that's usually the default plan you go to in green. Speaking of 3 drops, we got some good ones. Now, Rev is already flush with great 3 drops. We got Redeemer of Hollow Flesh, Hope's Trail Ranger, Aloris the Pathfinder, Faithline Marshal. All of these are great. Now let's add another one, Deep Cover Prowler, 3 mana 4/3. That's respectable stats. And whenever any creature you control becomes the target of a spell or ability opponent controls, you investigate. And if you've already created a clue turn, you draw a card set. If this ability triggers multiple times in a turn, you get to auto crack clues after the first one. That's great. And for 4 mana, instant speed, you can fragment this creature, making a 1/1 token copy. And the joke is that once you have the Paw Patrick root copy, the little Offspring one, then you'll get 2 triggers off them killing one of these, and then the first trigger will make you a clue. Second one will draw you a card. It's great. Good with other investigate things, like you can instant speed investigate. You can kind of like game this trigger to draw the card. 3 toughness is annoying. I really wish it would have 4 toughness, because Strangle, even though you get a clue, getting Strangled is a little unfortunate. Four tough. I really just when I'm building my green decks, I'm like, man, I really wish I had a 3 mana 3/4 or 4/4. 4/4 is great because it can block a fabricated anomaly that has a counter on it. Whereas this trades for fabricated anomalies with a counter on it. That 4 toughness would be really nice. Would make put it out of Deafening Clarion range, which that's really important for your green decks that are all creatures. So yeah, 4/3 instead of 4/4 really holds this back a lot. But I still think definitely worth ramping into on turn two with Husk Forger. Another 2/3 drop you could ramp into on turn two, Curious Botanist. 1 green, 3/3. Enter their attacks. You can either play an additional land, gain 2 life, or investigate. Just a nice little value card. It's an artifact. Good against aggro, gains life, draws cards, does lots of nice things. I think the card's very nice, very pleasant. Probably not unfair enough for Revolution standard, but like cool. I like this guy. Star Touched Arborist, 3 mana 2/3. When it enters, you search for a basic land, reveal it, put it in your hand, and shuffle. 2 and a colorless, tap, fragment it. I was mentioning because that's a pretty good body for this effect. Usually these cards are like 2/1s or something. It's a 2/3. He's just getting fragmented. I think this card's probably not good enough for standard, but worth considering at least. It's not that far under the curve. Going up to the 4s and 5s. I'm gonna be honest, with the loss of Survivors in New World, I don't know what the best green 4 drop is. Name a playable mono green 4 drop in Rev. I'll wait. I don't think there's one in Sterling and Goldport either, to be clear. But the best looking one is Gene Recombinators. Gene's a 4 mana 4/4. He just started working here. And then can pay 1 mana and sack 2 creatures with sorcery to make an XX ooze where X is the total power, can sack himself, and when he attacks with one of our tokens, you get a token as a copy of a token you control. I don't know, this is a really cool ability. It's a very efficient way to sacrifice creatures. You can sacrifice the oozes and himself, so there's a lot of flexibility here. I don't really see the reason I want this card, but if I have I don't know, overstated creatures with drawbacks or creatures I want to die, this is a really interesting card. It looks like it could do something. How about 5 mana, a card that can definitely do something? Awoken Cordillera is 5 mana for a 6/6 Devoid Trample, and when it dies, it comes back as a land that taps for 2 colorless mana and is missing a period after add colorless. No, it doesn't. Oh, goddammit. Sorry. That's actually, Catalyst, you got me here. I corrected you, but I was wrong. Sentences quoted in the middle of rule 6 don't get periods. That's one of the weirdest formatting rules in Magic. Anyways, when you spend 7 mana to cast spells in a turn, you turn the land face up and it's a 6/6 trample again. So we have been. The 5 drops you could play in green right now, we got lots of haste ones. There's Erstwhile Brigands. There's the one from Twiltree that reprieves to give your board a big buff or something. There's Aurora, freshly nerfed, but Aurora's still good. This kind of fits into your hard to kill 5 mana green creature. If what you wanted a 5 mana green creature is for them to be hard to kill and good in the deck, kind of ramping into 7 drops, maybe you're playing some of the Solitaire 7 drops. There is kind of a high mana value theme in this set. Yeah, I could see this being your 5 drop of choice, ramp into it with Husk Forger, and then keep going to bigger ramp somehow. Green non-creatures, big headline over here is Ruinate. 1 green sorcery, blow up all non-creature, non-land permanents, mana values 3 or less. So all of the planeswalkers, the artifacts, the enchantments, well, the battles are also all enchantments, but those two. The main card this is competing with for slots is Hungry Blob, which can't destroy quite as much stuff. Ruinate's a card you want against your opponent who's just completely vomiting stuff onto the board. But Hungry Blob is also a 2/2 creature, which is really nice. Yeah, Ruinate's gonna be a great safety valve. I'm gonna see it in a lot of sideboards, I imagine. Definitely a lot. Revolution has a history of decks that Ruinate would be good against. There's a Candy Reaper set, Ancient Stories. 1 mana sorcery, look at your top 5, get a colorless card, such as a Devoid card or a land from among them, put in your hand. Now, unfortunately, this set does not contain Urza's Tower, Urza's Tile Plant, or Urza's Mine. So the usual things you get with Ancient Stories aren't there. But if you're playing a lot of Devoid cards, this could be a good cantrip. I think that it's going to be hard for me to imagine a green deck that would rather have this than a Journey Begins. A Journey Begins is just such an efficient cantrip. Even in your deck that's playing a ton of huge Eldrazi, you probably also still have a lot of targets for a Journey Begins, and a Journey Begins is just so efficient, so much selection, that I think that's probably the better option here. It looks at 5 cards. Good life. I keep forgetting Journey Begins looks at 5 cards. Donnybrook is a 1 mana fight spell, and it's a sorcery, but you investigate. Momentous Strike has been a card that you can play in your green decks. Most green decks are a green and another color, so they just play your removal from the second color, or like their Strangle or Fateful set. But if you're mono green, or you're green blue, or you're green red, but you don't want to play Strangle for whatever reason, you could play Momentum Strike, and now you can play Donnybrook. It's fun to say. And, card advantage on removal spells, never underestimate that. Moving on to some gold cards. Starting out in red green, Grand Awakening is a card I really can't make heads or tails of. X red green green sorcery. You go find a creature card mono value X, put it on the battlefield, then you have to copy it. Copy isn't legendary and it's haste, and you sack it beginning next end step. There's gotta be some creature that you get with this and your opponent just explodes. Like if golems still existed, I'd be getting golems with this, but golems don't work. I'm looking around. I'm like, Silken Tactician? You say 7 mana, you get 2 Silken Tacticians, and they deal +3 damage? That seems a little sin. I don't know what this does. I'm sure it's going to do something. The combination of searching your library and giving things haste has to break something somehow. I just don't know how. Much more straightforward, Salar Caloran's Defiance is a 6 mana, 6/5 bear. It's got trample, and if you've been beginning your second main phase, you spend 6 or more mana. So basically, the turn you play this, you untap all your creatures and you get additional combat phase. So if you're kind of a red-green mid-range deck that's more assertive, you want a top-end card that kills them. This is a top-end card that kills them. Most red-green decks have been a little more value-oriented these days, but like, if they want a 6-drop, Hoenn, Champion, and Warden terms are both excellent 6-drops that I think mostly you're going to want instead of this. It doesn't have haste. It really looks like a card that would have haste, but it doesn't. So it doesn't actually do anything on its own. Which is like a real downside compared to like Warden Tremors and Hoenn Champion, which let you really rebuild against after a board wipe or against a lot of removal. In Simic, there's Leonard Experiment Zero. Leonard's a 4 mana 4/4 Ooze Horror, and comes with a 1/1 Eldrazi Scion. That's not bad stats. And whenever Leonard attacks with one or more tokens, all attacking tokens become copy of target non-legendary creature, yours or theirs. I don't really see the deck for this. I guess you'd have to be blue-green tokens, Bant tokens, Teamer tokens. Really, the token colors in Rev right now are green and white and kind of red. So Leonard's kind of a splash, but he's certainly got the stats, and he's got the ability, he's got the upside. I think I need an additional reason to be Bant tokens than just Leonard, and I don't know what that reason is. Maybe I'm forgetting one of the Twiltree blue-red tokens cards that's really good. But yeah. You'd also want good things to copy. That's just big creatures. You can find those. Two interesting blue-black cards. Greytide Spectre is a 5 mana 4/4 flyer, and when you cast it, you get to exchange any number of non-land cards in your graveyard with that many cards in your hand. Yeah, you do need cards in hand to do this, but this seemed like a real control mirror breaker. It's a cast trigger, so it's very hard to stop this trigger. And I can imagine you're in a controlled mirror. You go to your turn 5, you've got a bunch of cards in hand, you get up 7 cards in hand. You cast this, and you kind of really sculpt your hand. You get to bring back all of your best anti-control cards. You get to discard all of your worst anti-control cards. And that kind of sets you up to kind of win the control battle in the late game. Really interesting card. Obviously doesn't do an enormous amount against aggro, but I guess it gets you back your sweeper, probably. Essence Ripper is a 3 mana 2/4 Warlock. When it enters, you get exile 4 cards face down, 2 from each player, and you can pay black to discard a card, and you can play a card exiled with it, and it mono washes. So it's kind of a weird rummager. You can pay black and discard a card and draw one of these 4 cards. So it's not card advantage, it's just selection, but it's a lot of selection. It looks at 4 cards. 2/4 stat line, 4 toughness, as I said before, the magic number in Rev right now. The card it's competing with is mostly Mistrit Archivist, which is another 4 toughness, 3-drop that gets you card advantage. Mistrit has to attack, but it also gets you actual card advantage, not just selection. Yeah, Ripper is a little fair. Maybe some kind of Sultai mid-range deck, Sultai Graveyard could have something to do with this. Sultai self-discard, Void Call stuff. Discerning Patron is a 5 mana 2/4. When it enters, you lose 2 life and you surveil 2 and you draw 2 cards. Already, that's not a bad card at all. 5 mana 2/4, draw 2, lose 2, surveil 2. Not in that order. That's a pretty good pile of value right there. And for 2 mana, you can fragment it, which will get you a 1/1, and you pay a life, and you surveil 1, and you draw a card. So that's starting to be a lot of card draw on your white 5-drop. I could see this being a thing. If you're really I need white top-ended, I don't want to play Warden of Wishes for whatever reason. Yeah. this could do it. Probably Warden of Wishes is better, but it's still cool. In black green, we have a very, very powerful card, Ravaged Eviscerator. 2 mana, 2/1 comes with a 1/1 Scion. And when that Scion dies, this becomes a 3/2. Just 2 mana for a 2/1 and a 1/1 is like, that's kind of respectable. And this becoming a 3/2 later, and it ramps. Yeah, just a nice pile of value. I think black green mid range decks of all varieties will just go ahead and play this, and the next turn they'll play a 4-drop and they'll have a 3/2 and it'll be annoying. It'll be really powerful. Enraptured Tailspinner, 3 mana 2/2 flash. When it enters, you look at your top 6 for an instant sorcery or a card from Mythos. 6 is a lot. I don't really see the deck for this. I mean, the creature slots in your non-creature prowessy decks are really they're really tight. Like every card you include like this is one fewer cantrip in your deck that wants nothing more than to play cantrips all day long. And that probably gets us out of contention, but it's quite an efficient rating. It looks very deep. Considering in the Rev tradition of kind of just beefy green-white fair creatures, the West District Union's a 3 mana 3/4. Whenever attacks, if you have more creatures than your opponent, you get to draw a card. Otherwise, you get a 1/1. That's a pretty good deal. 3 mana 3/4. Once again, 4 toughness is the key here. And draws you cards or makes tokens in a deck that plays this. I think you're going to draw the card most of the time. If you don't draw a card, something really bad's happened. It's competing with Rosin, which obviously Rosin's still pretty busted, and Iloris. Iloris also kind of a go wide 3-drop 4 green white decks. But this card's right up there with the two of them. Could easily imagine this being kind of a headliner for a survivorless survivor deck. It doesn't have Survivor of the New World, but it has kind of a bunch of other kind of just very good green-white mid-range cards that draw cards and make tokens and just generate value. Okay, now going to the cards that cost colorless mana. I've kind of divided this into 3 sections. I think there's kind of 3 different colorless packages in this set. There's the Rampant to Big Creatures package, there's the Tempo package, and there's the Control package. So in the Rampant to Big Creatures package, there's Eternity Takes as 2 and a colorless for a card that for an instant that exiles an online permanent, but you have to pay 2 or behold a creature of mana value 7 or greater. Now, I've put up Rex Tyrannos here to remind you that all of the Solastair cards, like all of the 10 mana Eltonon counts for this. So it could be you can put a lot of those in your deck, and 3 mana instant, exile any non-land permanent. That's a really good backup plan to have. Ulalong's Augur, the 4 mana 3/3. When you cast it, you exile the top card of your opponent's library and a non-land permanent they control. But when it leaves the battlefield, they get one of those cards back. It's kind of a big Fiend Hunter. It puts the card back in their hand, not to the battlefield, which is nice, but it gives them a choice, which is less nice. I put Huskforger here just to remind you that Huskforger is our best source of colorless mana. So if you're kind of a green, if you're kind of a Eldrazi ramp deck, you're almost certainly playing Huskforger, and you're almost certainly playing green. And your 5-drop here is Burgeoning Amalgam, 5 mana, 5/5. It is a Doom counter for each colorless spent to cast it, and whenever it attacks or becomes a target spell, you can remove a Doom counter to make your opponent either exile a card from their hand or let you draw a card if they don't have any cards left. So we used to have this card called Ziv Repliespark, which is a planeswalker that costs 3 colorless. And Ziv was kind of the whole reason to be colorless back when they were legal. Just a really powerful, kind of above rate 5 mana, big bomb, beat your face in. I don't think we have anything quite like that for these colorless cards. Which makes me kind of skeptical of building the colorless deck. At the very least, like this kind of colorless deck. It's just you're these are good cards, perfectly reasonable mid-range cards, but you're kind of you're playing colorless instead of another full color. Like you're being a green-red colorless deck or whatever instead of a green-red-black deck. It's kind of easier to be black than colorless because black has shocklands. There's red, black, and green-black shocklands. There's no red colorless or green colorless shocklands. So these cards kind of have to match up to an entire color's worth of card from the other 8 sets in Rev, and I don't think they quite do that. But the Flash package I'm a little higher on, because you get access to Zayla's Arbiter. Now, this is a card. 3 mana 3/3 Flash. When you cast it, you exile a non-land permanent, and then it's airbend, basically. They can cast it playing 2 red mana cost. So, hello, this is Aang Swift Savior. Aang is a 2/3 flyer, which, 3/3 versus 2/3 flyer, kind of in the wash. Aang can airbend spells. That's really nice. But yeah, Zayla's Arbiter Aang is an incredibly strong card. Zayla's Arbiter is an incredibly strong card. Now that's a reason to be some kind of colorless tempo deck. You even have a Missos. You can pay white mana until your next turn. Spells cost one more to cast. That's not like a huge amount of upside, but sometimes this card will be sitting around and playing like, I got one mana left over. Sure, I'll make your next turn more annoying. And sometimes that'll be really important. Turns off combo decks, that's for dang sure. Also in this kind of white white colorless kind of tempo deck, you might play Null Emissary. It's a 3 mana 2/3, and it makes all creatures that are one or more colors, read all of your opponent's creatures, enter tapped. And you just get a 2 mana instant that taps the creature and draws a card. That's a pretty good instant. Um, Good 5 drop, good 3 drop. Yeah, I could see this being a thing. Also, annoyingly, all these cards cost 3. There's Black Site Enhancer, 1 white blue, but it's effectively it's colorless white blue for a 2/3 flash, and it gives all your other spells flash. We have Deflecting Kitsune kind of hinting at this idea of like a sort of go Y-ish, flash-ish, tempo-y, blue-white disruptive deck. Um, and, Zayla's Arbiter could be the unfair thing that deck needs to be playable. But I think the best version of colorless we're seeing is blue-white colorless control. If there's any version of colorless going to make a difference, I think it's for these 3 cards here. So, Eldritch Rebuttal, 1 the blue for an instant, counters a spell unless control pays 2, but for colorless and blue, unless it pays 3 instead. Not like blowing anyone's mind, but it's a pretty good counter spell if you have colorless mana incidentally. Subsume Reality. Now, this is a really big payoff. 2 white blue instant, you choose one, but if colorless casts a spell, you choose both. You can either put a spell or non land permanent into the owner's library, serve from the top. So that's just like hard removal or hard counter. And you can look at your top 3 cards, put one in your hand, one on top, one on the bottom. So it's card selection, it draws cards, it removes permanents of all kinds, it counters spells, it gets around uncounterable spells. I think one of the reasons I'm really high on blue-white colorless control as opposed to other colorless decks is a lot of the cards that make colorless, a lot of the lands you have to play to make colorless mana are tap lands. There's the blue colorless tap land, the white colorless tap land, the blue-white colorless tap land. And if you're playing that many tap lands, you kind of can't play an aggressive or tempo game. You have to play a control game. And so these cards fit with the mana base better. Subsume Reality is a really excellent card. I think it's the strongest card that rewards for playing colorless mana. There's also Ullman, Triune Liaison. This is kind of your top end finisher. 4 mana for a 3/4 Zay-Zem. And whenever you cast a spell, if you spent colorless mana to cast it, draw a card. So that's basically all of your spells that cost more than 1 mana, you should be able to draw a card off of them. That's pretty good. And if you spent 3 colorless mana to cast a spell, you get to copy it. There aren't a lot of spells in Rev that you want to play that you could actually spend 3 colorless mana on. Like, you think, oh, I can play my 4-drop, but all your 4-drops are double pipped. Beyond Comprehension is double pipped, and also you wouldn't want to copy Beyond Comprehension when you have a creature. I think the best option for this is 3 become 1. That's a spell you actually could spend colorless on. Copying a 3 become 1 seems pretty good, and you draw a card and copy it. Yeah, I think you could be a control deck. You got Subsume Reality, you got Eldritch Rebuttal, you can support your blue colorless mana base. You get to play the tap lands that sack and make the nowheres, and then Ullman is your finisher. You kind of play Ullman, leaving up a counterspell. When you play the counterspell, you draw a card. Then you get to untap and just draw a bajillion cards and win the game. Okay, and now we move on to the colorless, but like actually colorless, not like you know what I mean section. And there's some good cards here too. Big headliner here is Moonstone Splendor. 2 mana for an uncommon artifact, and it taps for colorless. And you can tap for one of any color, but for Mythos spells. Basically, we already had a Mono Rock in Rev right now, in the Founder's Cage. But the Founder's Cage enters tapped, and it does run out eventually. You kind of wanted the Founder's Cage only if you had Planeswalkers to make it do something. But Moonstone Splinter enters untapped. That's a huge deal. That means on turn 3, you can play Moonstone Splinter, immediately tap it and your 3rd land for a 2-drop. So effectively only cost you 1 mana that turn. Yeah, I think this is now one of our best ramp spells. I think probably you play this over all of the 2 mana dorks in Rev. Right now, it's just harder to interact with. Harder to interact with. Enters untapped, gets you mana immediately. Both of those are hugely important. Haven't seen a lot of decks that really want this. Aggro has been good recently, and that really curtails your ability to play 2 drops that don't affect the board at all. But 1 drops that don't affect the board at all? those are a lot more reasonable. And that's kind of what this is after turn 2. Lance's Journal, look, we all mourn the loss of Ignited Soul. We're like, how will I draw a card and discard a card every turn? Will I have to play the Flipwalker, the blue Flipwalker from Valir, whose name escapes me right now? That card's not that strong. Well, here's another option that's honestly not that strong. 2 mana for an artifact book. 1 tap, draw a card and discard a card. You put a page counter on it, and 1 tap, remove X page counters. You can get a card back from your graveyard and cast for free, mana value X or less. This is one mana on that first ability is really rough. 2 mana up front I can deal with, but 1 mana tap, that's pretty expensive. But it does filter, and that last ability is not nothing. You can probably loot 3 or 4 times and pay 1 mana, get a 3 or 4 drop, recoup some of that spent mana. The real answer to how you draw and discard a card every turn is Puzzle Box, by the way. It's just Fabricated Anomaly. That's just how you do it these days. There's also Thought Scraper. This is a really interesting card. 2 mana for a 2/2 Eldrazi. Chooses a card name. I think it is not me spoiling behind the scenes thing to say that. It's going to say non-land card name sometime pretty soon. Triggered ability, the source of the chosen name, don't trigger. So yeah. This is kind of an alternative to Golden Boom of the Silenced. Only affects triggered abilities, but is also a 2/2 creature if you care about 2/2 creatures. Okay, now let's talk about decks. We're going to start by talking about decks that already exist and what they're getting in this set, going through kind of the entire Rev meta as I see it. Starting with Enchantment Midrange, this is a deck that kind of Aerosbane, Deadshot, and Buoyant Datagrader are the core of this deck, and they're looking for more enchantments. We've mentioned a couple enchantments. This could be a world we're fighting for deck. This deck could certainly want value enchantments, and it's got both creatures and non-creatures. Public Exhibition is a card I didn't bring up, but it's a pretty good removal spell. 1 in a blue for an aura, you enchant a creature or artifact, it turns it into a clue, and it loses all types and abilities. We do currently have Collector's Item that turns it into an O2, but you also get to Surveil too. I think this is a pretty good removal spell, especially if artifacts start to be a sing in Rev. Turning off artifacts could be a sing. Normally you wouldn't play this. You'd play a red removal spell. You'd play just a bounce spell or something. But if you care about enchantments, I can see Public Exhibition just sneaking its way maybe into your sideboard. Otherwise, not a lot of enchantments. It's more of an artifact theme set. Kara's Monument is kind of a deck unto itself. Really rose for playing a bunch of enchantments and artifacts. Hoopstrail Ranger and the whole Concord mechanic also works with this. Wreckage Inquisitors is a 1-mana 1/2 that makes an artifact. In your Kara's Monument deck, if you're on the kind of the more green-white creature-based Kara's Monument deck, as opposed to the red-white kind of no creatures control Kara's Monument build, Wreckage Inquisitors could be a 1-drop you consider. Also, we're considering Cataclysm Constable as a 2-mana 2/2. Whenever 1 or more creatures you control hit your opponent, you investigate. It's a little small ball, but if you're really hungry for clues, I can see Cataclysm Constable getting there. Red Aggro is kind of the headline card. We already mentioned Iker Winnower, Steel Soul Ignition. This is the deck really built around the powerful cards like Rose on Firebrand, Face of Animosity, Brazen Burglar, Catch Thrasher, Strangle. Lots of really good Red Aggro cards. Force to be reckoned with, not losing a lot of Cliques of Nylon. Cavalest Reshapen is another 2-drop you could theoretically consider 2-mana 2/2 haste, and when it enters, you can turn a card in your hand to a 2-mana 2/2 haste by paying 1 red and discarding it. I think the biggest get that Red Aggro gets this rotation is Steel Soul Ignition. I was looking for another 1-drop. Steel Soul Ignition, I think, fits the bill. Flash, Secrecy, Sneak is a whole package based around either the Flash Matters cards from Solitaire or the card Secrecy, which rewards for playing creatures outside of your main phase. Malignant Monophage, I think, fits right into this deck. That's a card that seems pretty likely to play in both versions of this. Stelver, the Eyes and Ears, is that if you're a value Secrecy or value Interstellar Sage, which we have seen Flash Control, blue-green Flash Control be a thing, blue-green-white Flash Control, Stelver is a possibility. 5 on a 4/4 Flash. When it enters, return up to 1 target creature each player controls from his hand, and you investigate. And when near a active clue, you can cast creature ability or Flash. In this deck, all your creatures have Flash enemies, so ignore that last line of text. But 5 on a 4/4 bounces their guy, bounces your guy, maybe your Interstellar Sage or something, and you investigate. That's a lot of value. That's an amount of value that you could even consider being worth paying 5 mana for. Also, just bringing up Fade and Scour the Records as 2 excellent instants. If you care about not just creatures with Flash, but instants in general, 2 instants you can always consider. Reanimator. Oh, right. There's like Big Eldrazi in the set. Did you know there are Big Eldrazi in the set? I haven't brought it up yet. Specifically, Kozilek the Bondsman Maid is a 12 mana 12/12 with Ward, discard 2 cards, and your maximum hand size is 12. And whenever you cast this spell or Kozilek attacks, you draw 5 cards, you add 5 colorless. Till on turn, you don't lose mana steps and phases edge. So, um, I think this is the best reanimator target in the set. The ward is really annoying, and if it ever gets to attack, you basically win the game. You draw 5 cards, you add 5 mana, you should be able to win from there. We have a very good reanimate in Rev right now in Reclaim the Fallen. It's a reanimate that can do it from the graveyard, so it really simplifies the reanimation puzzle. You don't need to get a card in your hand and a card in your graveyard. You just need to get cards in your graveyard. Um, Currently, the card you reanimate most often is Privilege Escalation. Privilege Escalation really does a number on a lot of decks, but I think specifically against control, you'd probably rather have Kozilek because that ward trigger is pretty good. Another card you might want against control, Supreme Desecrator. That really messes your opponent's mana base. 9 mana, 9/1, 9/9, dings your opponent whenever they tap their lands for colorless mana. It's fine. Maybe you do it. But I think if it's not Kozilek, it's going to be Ulamog. 11 mana, 10/10 indestructible. It has an Annihilator 1. You're not going to have any other draws in your Reanimator deck, I don't think. And whenever it attacks, you get to search your opponent's library for 7 cards and exile them. Basically, if the meta is such that all their removal is destroy, like people aren't playing the Gone Pickens and the Sanctum Repressions, they're only playing the Fateful Ascents and the black removal, then reanimating an indestructible creature could be the key to beating control decks. This Ulamog's a lot worse against like big board of creatures because it can only block one of them and they can just sack a random token. Um, Privileged Collision can sometimes like really reduce your opponent's board state, prevent you from dying on the crackback. But Ulamog is very annoying, especially if that indestructible matters, especially against certain control decks. Oh yeah, I'm bringing up that we have a number of ways that we also have Lance's Journal as a way to draw then discard, and Fabricated Anomaly as the other, as our other big discard. We have lots of discard outlets in the set and in Rev in general for your Reanimator, and Lance's Journal could be one of them if you're more of a controlling Reanimator deck. In tokens, Kitsune Matriarch has really supported a whole raft of different token decks. Volunteer Firewatch is now another good 1-drop for tokens decks. 1/1 1/1 Vigilance. When it attacks alongside a token, you put a +1 counter on it. Now, the only thing is, this isn't going to get a counter turn it comes down. It's not going to counter if the turn comes down. And if you play it on turn 1, it's not going to get a counter on turn 2 unless you play Steel Soul Ignition, because you need a hasty token. So it grows a lot slower than Kitsune Matriarch because it doesn't grow the turn it comes down, or if you play it on turn 1, the next turn. But I think density of 1-drops that grow when you play tokens is something that, even a discount Kitsune Matriarch is still pretty good. Rose Garden Conference, another card very much worth considering in your tokens deck. It's not a token, but it's a 2 mana 3/2, and when it attacks alongside one or more tokens, you can turn one of your lands into an XX elemental until in turn where X is the number of attacking tokens, and you may have it become tapped and attacking. So you go down lands to do that. First of all, no matter what, this can untap the land. Even if you don't really want to attack with the land, it does turn one of your lands. It just untaps it, gets you mana. That's nice. Or, like, you attack with this and 2 tokens, you get turned one of your lands into a 2/2. That's a solid amount of damage through. Lets you go even wider. It lets the card, it lets you go wide when you've already gone wide. When you've made creature tokens, it lets you attack with 2 creatures with your 2-drop, which is what you want to do. So yeah, I think definitely a card you should experiment with in your green-white tokens decks. Mentioning that, the big ansem for tokens decks these days is Consume the Divine. Very strong ansem. There's some other token-ish top end for this in this set. In Strength Entwined is a 2 mana enchantment that gives your creature tokens +1/+1. 2 mana ansem, certainly nothing to sneeze at. I think you probably are willing to pay the extra mana for Consume the Divine, just for the extra upside it gets. But in Strength Entwined could be a thing. It's also true, like, it doesn't buff all your creatures. Like, even in your tokens deck, not all of your creatures are tokens. I'm low on this card. High Sergeant Liana, we've already gone over. Obviously, if you're building a tokens deck, is a card you consider. And if you're willing to bend your tokens deck into blue for some reason, Lost Lands Auspex is a 4 mana 3/5 flying. And if you create one or more tokens, you draw that many cards instead, only once each turn. So, if you're making a lot of clue tokens, if you're making a lot of buried tokens, what you really want to do is make multiple tokens at once with like a raise the alarm type effect. That's how you get the best use out of this. Funky looking card, and we have a lot of ways of making random incidental tokens in Rev right now. So this could really be a thing. Blue red, kind of, I've lumped together terrors and prowess here. These are blue decks that are often red and often play a bunch of non-creature spells. They get a really interesting colorless card actually in Kozilek's Hexer. So if you're willing to build blue-red colorless kind of prowess, you get a 2-mana, 2/1 prowess that lets you spend colorless mana, doesn't any color. But the big payoff here is the Missos Nullstorm. Blue, red, red, you exile an instant or sorcery, mana value 4 or less from your graveyard, and you copy it. Cast a copy without paying its mana cost. Um, I think this doesn't fit naturally into the aggressive blue-red prowess deck, into the kind of controlling blue-red terrors deck. Kind of its own thing. You need to be colorless mana, and you need 4 mana sorceries. Probably Collected Sots is the answer here. Collected Sots makes a lot of sense here. It's itself a 4 mana instant or sorcery, and it lets you want to play a bunch of 3 mana instants or sorceries. It's kind of like, hitting a 3 mana sorcery of Nullstorm, not bad either. On Top of the World is another card you could reset your Kozilek's Hexer, or just keep your Kozilek's Hexer and reset everything else. Yeah, this is kind of a weird build around that I think might have some legs. They're under the creature type line. All other interesting kind of prowessy cards. Frida, Weft Dancer is a 3 mana 1/3 flyer. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you get a 1/1 illusion, and you can be 2 mana tap and tap a bunch of your untapped creatures to copy a non-creature spell. That's a pretty good kind of young pyromancer type effect. 3 toughness is nice, although 4 would be better. And lets you copy your spells. Just 2 mana tap one of your illusions, copy your cantrip. That's not bad, and it's not that hard to get enough power to copy big things. I have Sundering the Fleet here at the card that's very good to copy this because it has mana value 1, but you don't have to pay the additional cost again. Billowing Weftraker, the 4 mana 3/3. Whenever you cast a non-creature, you get no draw the Scion, and for 2 mana, you can copy insert a sorcery. Look, just 2 mana instant copy insert a sorcery is not that bad of a card, and getting that as an option on your 4 mana Young Pyromancer, that's worth considering. I think the way to build blue-red spells right now really kind of is lean into the aggressive aspect, lean into the kill your opponent aspect, rather than kind of play these 3 drops and 4 drops and kind of mid-range your opponent. But I'm always hopeful that such a deck could exist. Right. Just a reminder that Last Wish combo, if you have a fork out and it runs and you cast Last Wish, you win the game. That deck didn't get anything from Sterling and Goldport, but it's a good combo deck, and you could just play generic teamer cards. Inner Inferno as well. I didn't find anything great for the Inner Inferno, Cleansing Starfire, Burning Shigana Manor type package that really wants you to put counters on things. No sagas or such in this set. Not really a counters theme to replace the one we're losing in Cleveland Island. But this is still very much a good package to build around. Oh, and Self Bounce. So this is a deck that we've seen a lot of different variations on, really kind of built around often Contest Coordinator, but especially Data Visionary, the new very good kind of 2 mana 1/1 that gets you a card from Errors in the Weft. We're getting a lot, if you're playing, play Data Visionary, play Jump, bounce your Data Visionary, bring it back, play Sanction Repression, get it back. We got some other creatures you might consider bouncing and blinking. Scape Surveyor, 2 mana 1/3, goes and gets a Plains through Waste. It's like Contest Coordinator, but it doesn't ask any deck building questions, and it flies. I could easily imagine, just, keep bouncing this, send out all the planes from your deck. That's not nothing. Wreckage Inquisitors, you're always on the lookout for 1-drops that are good to bounce, because, you want to play a 1-drop so you can bounce it on turn 2. It just makes it so much easier to bounce cards back in your head when they cost 1 rather than 2. It's a good one. Haunted Starlet. This deck is typically not black, but if it is, you're certainly playing a lot of creatures power 2 or less in this kind of deck, and while you're doing that, you might as well make spell draw these Scions to pay for this deck can be quite mana hungry. In terms of ways to bounce and blink your creatures, we already have Sanctum Repression, but there's a lot of good options for bouncity, blinkety stuff. Roiling Undertow, I'm really interested in. X blue blue, you fragment a creature you control, mana value X, and you get to bounce X creatures. So you have to have a target for the first ability. You just cannot cast this unless you control a creature. But suppose you control a Data Visionary. You pay 4 mana, you get another Data Visionary, it's just as good as the first one, and you bounce 2 of your opponent's creatures. That sounds pretty good. I don't know. 4 mana, bounce 2 creatures. You could also fragment your Data Visionary, then bounce your Data Visionary and one of their creatures. You now have a Data Visionary in your hand that you can recast it, and you also got a token copy. Yeah, it's there's something here. It's kind of fiddly fadoodly, and if they kill all your creatures, you're real sad. But it's really got some interesting potential, and you can also overpay. Even if you just have a Data Visionary to copy, you can still pay 6 mana, bounce 4 of your opponent's creatures, and copy the Data Visionary. It's X or less on that one. There's also both modes actually. You can just pay more mana for no reason if you feel like it. Also, there's Ether Joyride, 2 mana sorcery. You fragment a creature you own and then you exile it. You may cast as long as it means exiled. So once again, imagine I have a Data Visionary. I Ether Joyride my Data Visionary. I get a 1/1 Data Visionary, and then I have a Data Visionary in exile that I can cast for as long as it remains exiled. I have no idea why it's in exile and not in my hand, because I can cast it just the same. Um, but yeah, basically that's 2 mana for a Data Visionary trigger, and I draw a Data Visionary. Let's kind of draw 2 cards, but one of the cards is pretty good, and the other card's pretty good too. 2 mana sorcery, draw 2 cards. The thing about Ether Joyride is when you're doing the blinkety bounce of these things, you're already drawing a bajillion cards. Your Data Visionary draws you cards, and your Contest Coordinator draws you cards, and all your cards draw you cards, and your cards. What you really need is ways to convert drawing a bunch of cards into like affecting the board and winning the game. It's why like Roiling Undertow is like it buys you time by buying your opponent's creatures so you can draw some more cards, or Sanctum Repression, which allows you to reset your creatures so you can play them and draw more cards, but it also removes your opponent's things so you don't die while you can keep drawing cards. Ether Joyride is like, while you're drawing cards, you can play this card to draw even more cards. Like, kind of doesn't solve the problem, but it doesn't solve the problem really efficiently. Zeppelin Disaster is kind of an interesting one. It's a 2 mana sorcery. You can either exile an artifact or enchantment, lots of those going around right these days, or you can fragment a creature you control with mana value X or less. This is kind of in a weird build around sideboard place where you're probably going to put this in your sideboard of your deck that has interesting things to fragment. Now, if you really want to maximize this card, you would want to have 3 drops that are good to fragment. I've been looking around. There's not actually that many of them. There's like Frog of Eternal Gloom, but all the creatures are like, oh, 3. There's not a lot like 3 mana, 1/1. When it enters, you get a ton of value. It's mostly 2 drops in that slot for some reason. But if you're interested in like, there are artifacts and enchantments I would like to blow up, and I'm incidentally a deck that wouldn't mind just like being able to copy my Data Visionary for 2 mana, yeah, I could easily see this making the sideboard. A kind of dark horse option for this deck is Karsten the Spinner. 3 mana, 2/3 Death Touch Lifelink. Not bad stats. And when it hits your opponent, you get to blink one of your creatures, and it comes back with a +1/+1 counter. I think 3 mana creature with 3 toughness that needs to hit your opponent to do anything in a color pair that like black is not really a blink color in Rev right now. I think it's asking a few too many things, but it's like it's got the raw power if it's got the support. I just don't think it has the support right now. Okay, that's the old. But let's talk about brand new decks that I think might be a thing because of Stirrings and Goldport. Starting with Big Cheaties, there's an Emrakul in this set. We already had Emrakul, but what about second Emrakul? 14 mana, 14/14. When you cast it, your opponent exiles their hand, and you can cast a spell from among them without paying its mana cost. It's got Flample, and if your opponent has 1 or fewer cards in their hand, it has Hexproof. Respect her pronouns. She, her. She's pretty strong. We don't have a lot of ways to cheat this out. I have Emrakul's Conscriptor, which is a 10 mana 10/10, also have a great cast trigger, although if we're going to cheat cast triggers, let's go ahead and cheat the biggest cast trigger we can, okay? So we do have a way to cheat cast triggers. It's Weft Dancer from Airs in the Weft. Annoyingly, that cheats when this creature enters if it was cast triggers. It doesn't cheat when you cast this spell triggers. Our best way to get Emrakul onto the battlefield right now is probably Sakura Dance. Sakura Dance is whenever you discard an online card, you can copy it and cast it paying its mana cost, and it's 6 mana enchantment. 6 mana enchantment, doing no enchantment's already tough, but you play that, find a way to discard Emrakul, probably you play Sakura Dance, you immediately tap your puzzle box to discard Emrakul, then you get the whole Emrakul shebang. You get the cast trigger, you get the Flample, you get the Hexproof, you get to cast a spell, it's everything. Also, you could cheat Emrakul into play a different way. You could like reanimate Emrakul, and then you could jump the gap it, which will let you exile the Emrakul and then recast it. This feels like too much work. I feel like if I'm going to do that, I might as well just reanimate something that wins the game on its own without needing a third card. Reanimating one creature is already hard enough. Also, reanimate decks aren't blue right now, they're red. So yeah, I think Sakura Dance is honestly the best way to do Emrakul, and I think that's probably a little janky, but I don't know. New Sakura Dance has been looking for something really, really busted to cheat to play, and I mean, this certainly counts. The other place you might see this, I can imagine if you have Last Wish in your deck, putting one of these in your sideboard for those situations like, man, I just have a bajillion mana and 1 Last Wish, and I need to get the most impactful card possible. Yeah, this probably does the job. Artifacts. Okay, this is a big theme of the set. It's got a lot of support. Basically, there's an artifact aggro deck in red-white in this set, and it's very strongly supported in Stirrings and Goldport, but it really doesn't have a lot of support from any other set. So maybe this deck makes it, but it's kind of like Stirrings and Goldport block constructed artifacts. Starting on 1, High Forged Overseer, 1 mana 2 1, and whenever a non token artifact you control enters, you pay 1, you put a +1 counter on target creature you control. Worth noting, almost all of these payoffs care about artifact spells, artifact creatures, and non token artifacts, whereas basically all the ways we have of making lots of artifacts in Rev right now involve artifact tokens, involve berries and treasures, especially berries. Like Smart Shopper dumps out enormous numbers of artifacts, but unfortunately, almost none of these payoffs work with Smart Shopper, which is unfortunate. Um, yeah, if Artifact aggro is a thing, High Force Overseer is going to be one of the reasons why. Steel Suit Consultant, the 2 on a 2/2 of haste. Whenever an artifact you control enters, it deals 1 damage to target player. One or more artifacts. Sorry, if you make 2 berries at a time, you only hit for 1. 2 on 2 to haste is like a pretty reasonable, certainly for a common. Um, I have Consultant here mainly because this looks like a card that's the outlet for some kind of infinite. There's going to be some kind of infinite where you make infinite berry tokens or something, and Steel Suit Consultant will be how you win the game. I just know it. It has that smell. Sculptor's Replica is one of the few artifact payoffs from outside of Stirring and Goldport. The 2 mana 2 artifact creature works well with all the stuff. And for 5 mana with Flow, you get a Construct. And you know, you can tap that Construct to make more Constructs. Always have been a pretty good card, and maybe it'll have a new home here. It's certainly, I think, your artifact aggregate is going to start out with 4 High Forgers here, 4 Sculptor's Replica. Probably also 4 of some number of these 3 drops. Artillery Commander is a 3 mana 3/3, and whenever another non token artifact you control enters, it dings your opponent for 1 and you gain a life. And when you attack with 2 or more artifact creatures, you get to Impulse Draw a card. That sounds, I don't know, sounds like a nice combination of effects if you have a bunch of non token artifact creatures. It's kind of specific. By the way, I'm not showing you like the highlights. This is the whole thing. Like the problem with this deck is this is all the good artifact aggro 1 drop. This is all the good artifact aggro 2 drops. Darkwood Gorillas is a pretty good 3 drop. It's a 3 mana 3/3 first strike. Enters, you get to look at top X or X the number of artifacts you control, and you get to exile 2 of them, and you get to play a card exile if it never attacks. Yep, good kind of card drawing 3 mana creature. Containment Seraph, another good artifact creature, 3 mana 2/1, exile a non-token creature. When it leaves the battlefield, they get back some stuff. The problem with this deck is really it wants to be an aggro deck, but like, what's the second 2 drop? If you had a second good 2 mana artifact creature, this deck I think could really have a chance. But it's just Sculptor's Replica. There was flaw in the system, but that just rotated. There's just no other good 2 mana artifact creature. Maybe I've forgotten one. But like Smart Shopper, which is the card you would play in White Black Hardsuit, or Hardsuit itself, the Attuned Acolyte, those aren't artifact creatures, so they don't work with Artillery Commander. They do work with Darkwood Gorilla. Darkwood Gorilla, uniquely among all these payoffs, it doesn't care about tokens or creatures. It works with berries just fine. So maybe that'll be kind of a berry flavored thing. And High Forge over here will just kind of work with the things. You're willing to keep going up the curve. On 4 mana, there's Magnetling. That's a fine card. Also, Elisa, Hand of Torvinald. 4 mana 4/4. When it enters, you get to put 2 +1/+1 counters and a flying counters on an artifact you control, and may have it become a 0/0 artifact creature. And you can do that same thing for 4 mana and tap 2 under artifacts or creatures. Yeah. I mean, if you have a bunch of artifact creatures lying around, this is going to be a lot of stats, kind of repeatedly. Kraz Engineer, 5 mana 4/4, gives your artifact creatures haste, including when they enter. He enters. Oh, weird. Goblins don't have pronouns in this set, I guess. They don't use pronouns. When Kraz enters, Kraz is going to make you a 0/0 construct, basically. Kraz is, I think, a little underpowered, but I think if you could consider Kraz, and I think if Kraz gets some buffs, which, okay, I'll let you in a little secret. Kraz might be getting some buffs, then you might play Kraz. Just remember, no pronouns for Kraz. Always say the full name Kraz every time. It's not that long. Oh, and, one of the big payoffs you could do for artifacts is the West District Hangar. 2 mana artifact taps for 2 mana. You can't spend it to cast non-artifact spells. And if you have 4 more artifacts, if a source you control would deal damage to your opponent's stuff, that much damage +2 instead. So basically gives your board +2/+0. I don't know how you're going to do this, but 3 mana artifacts that taps for 2 scares me. So I'm sure it'll do something. And possibly the biggest artifact payoff in Stirring and Goldport, Hall of Innovation. Land tap for colorless, 2 tap, makes an artifact creature unblockable. So, one way you could build artifacts is just ignore all of the artifact payoffs we've seen so far, and just build the same Hardsuit, Attuned Acolyte, make tons of treasures, make tons of berries. Maybe you play the Cocoon. Maybe you play Smart Shopper. You make enormous Construct. You make enormous creatures with the Exalted triggers from Attuned Acolyte. and then you can give them unblockable. Giving your giant creatures unblockable was a thing that deck really wanted. Like sometimes you would play Genotype Splicer just to teach your creature flying, so they wouldn't chump block your one creature that was getting 15 exalted triggers. Hall of Innovation lets you get that advantage without having to put Genotype Splicer in your deck, which is good because it rotated. Instead, you can just do it in your mana base, which is so much easier. So yeah, that might be the biggest payoff that artifacts get in this set, because it works with our existing artifact payoffs. Oh yeah, and if you're in artifacts, you can consider Elden Crucible. It's like Gone Pickin', but it's an artifact, and it also surveils one. That ability is like not nothing. Yeah, if you care about artifacts and enchantments, or if you just want your removal spell to not die to Fateful Ascent, you can play this. And Jetfoot Greaves. This is also really interesting. It's a 2 mana artifact equipment vehicle. Vehicle, it gets +1/+1 for each artifact you control and crew 2, or equip for 2 and it gives the equipped creature +1/+1 for each artifact you control. This is another card that you could easily put into your like Hall of Innovation hard suit deck. I will note, despite the art, it does not have flying. Its keyword not flying. It really looks like it has flying. It does not have flying. It doesn't give the equipped creature flying. So yeah, if you need another creature either to equip this to or to crew this for it to do anything. But yeah, this is the kind of thing that has certainly been the payoff for artifact decks many times throughout Rev and Canon. There is so the Void Calls is a mechanic you can enable in two ways. Either by milling cards or discarding cards. And this mechanic exists in 3 colors, blue, black, and red. I think I can split those pretty evenly into blue, black, self-mill, and black, red, discard. Blue, black, self-mill is more value, black, red, discard is more aggro. Starting in blue, black, big headliner here is Devonia, Lost Ministrix. 2 mana, 2/1. When she enters, you mill 2 cards. That triggers her third ability, where you get to exile an instant sorcery card from your graveyard and cast a copy. So this is just a Snapcaster that happens to mill you for 2, so basically kind of does the same thing as Arctic's the Intangible, but this caster gets to snap again whenever you mill yourself, once each turn rather, but like, you're going to cast your Thought Scour, and then you get to cast another Thought Scour from your graveyard. You're going to cast your Thought Scour, and you're going to immediately get back your removal spell. The idea, like a Snapcaster that remains on the board and is still a threat turn after turn, is like a really dangerous card. I could see this going some strange places, going some very powerful places. Esmelard Avarice is a 3 mana 3/3. Once each turn the Void calls you, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain a life. And once you got 7 cards in your graveyard, you can pay 5 mana to turn her into a flying 7/7. Still keeps that ability. Yep, if you're a self-milling, especially, Thought Scour mills you on your opponent's turn, this can do an interesting thing. Corpse Inspector is kind of the lesser 3 mana spell that cares about Void Call, but I think you could see this out of the sideboard. If you're already enabling Void Call really easily, you can play this 3 mana 3/3, and whenever the Void calls, you get to exile a card from a graveyard. So that could be pretty, quite a lot of graveyard hate. And you get the 3/3, and when it dies, you get a bunch of 2/1 Warlocks and a bunch of mana. The mana's not that useful, but the Warlocks are. And just bringing up, we already have a lot of payoffs for milling us, including Echo Choreographer has always been kind of hanging around as, a way to reward you for milling yourself by getting you cards. And it's a nice 1-drop. And you see, like, we got a curve here: Echo Choreographer, Devonia, Esme, Thought Scour, Overrule Will, Pact Beyond Death, Lutra Inquizos, new one from this set, North Falkland Vigil. 2 mana sorcery, look at your top 3, 1 in your hand, other in your graveyard, and once the Void calls, you can pay 2 mana, exile from your graveyard, draw a card, lose a life. Possibly you want Pact Beyond Death instead, which does the same thing, but instead of drawing a card, lose a life has this kind of battle upside. But, while you're milling yourself, why not mill cards that you can then exile from your graveyard to draw cards and lose a life? So yeah, I think North Falcon Vigil, once again, Devonia and Echo Choreographer are both, and Thought Scour and Lutra Inquizos are all like card draw, card selection value cards. So what you kind of want is ways to mill yourself that aren't card draw, that like affect the game, affect the board, stuff like Overrule Will or the Life Gain on Pact Beyond Death, rather than like cards that do that and then are furthermore card draw. But North Falcon Vigil is certainly a lot of very efficient card draw. On the discard side, Calamity Cat is kind of your headliner 1-drop that lets you discard things and be aggressive in your black-red self-discard deck. Ashen Ravager, 1 mana 1/1. At your end step, you get a +1/+1 counter if the Void called you this turn. So as you're doing this and getting counters every turn, it gets counters a little slower than like a Marauding Mako, but when it dies while its power is 3 or greater, it bolts your opponent, which is really rude. It's like, that's something a Marauding Mako surely cannot do. It's also a wolf, randomly. So if you could somehow play Embers of the New Moon in this deck, I don't think that works. I guess there's that werewolf that discards your hand and draws you a card. Maybe that's a thing. Embers of the New Moon is a very powerful build around. Up at 2 mana, I mean, we already have Mercenary of Dusk, Gilded New Entertainer, Darksome Migrant as aggressive creatures that enable Void Call. And to that, add Insatiate Slasher, 2 mana 3/2 with a tough mana cost. But, along with the Void Call, you can play it from your graveyard as a 3/2 haste for 2 mana. That's some grind. Also, obviously, a good card to discard. It effectively has Madness or Mayhem. Up to 3 mana. The most important card for your discard deck is obviously Fabricated Anomaly. Works well with all the cards we just discussed. Gets you your Void Call trigger every turn. Also, with the 3-drop slot, you could play Ixander, Half Forgotten, 3 mana 2/2 Menace. And end step Void Calls, you get a 2/1 Black Warlock. Yeah, if you're doing the thing, this is going to get you a lot of value. You really want to get one the turn it comes down, which is why the Puzzle Box as a 0 mana way to discard card is so important to this deck. Obsessive Ritualist, 3 mana 2/3. When it comes down, each player discards a card, and because you discarded a card, it's a 3/4 Death Touch Haste the turn it comes down. Probably because you want to play, you definitely need 4 Anomaly, and you probably want some number of Ixander. This probably gets squeezed out, but if you're too aggressive for Ixander, Ritualist probably gets into your deck instead. And up at 4 mana, Panic, maybe you play it. It does discard cards, although it's a little expensive to do that for your payoffs that want you to kind of discard cards repeatedly. You could also play Cavalesque, 4 mana 4/3. Whenever a card enters your graveyard from your hand or library, you may exile it. You may play the card's turn. This card certainly looks like it is combo application because it turns all of your self mill and all of your discard into card draw. So if you can find a way to like gain mana as you're doing this, it can certainly like draw a ton of cards. It even has a Mythos of 2 mana, discard up to 3 cards, then draw that many cards, which is not that bad. So yeah, 3 toughness, kind of rough, but certainly a lot of value to be had here. Clues! There is one really big clue payoff in this set, which is Gloamveil Trackers. 4 mana 4/5 trample. Whenever you cast your first creature spell each turn, you investigate. And beginning combat on your turn, your clues becomes 3/3s with trample, and when they hit your opponent, you sack him to draw a card. Also a dog. The clues aren't dogs. She like has type dog because she works with dogs. Anyways, if you can make a lot of clues, this can turn these clues into killing your opponent with haste, even effectively, because it does the turn it comes down. We have already seen a lot of good cards that incidentally make clues, like Curious Botanist, Donnybrook, Deep Cover Prowler. If you don't have to be in blue at all. This can be a mono green package. But if you're willing to go into blue, you get the good blue clue makers like Fade, but also Concerning Discoveries. 2 mana enchantments. When it enters, you either investigate or you sack a clue to draw a card. And when you sack a clue, you tap or untap target permanent. So that's ramp if you're kind of untapping your lands. But the reason I'm bringing this card up is because this can tap your opponent's lands once each turn, but like on your upkeep, I'm going to crack my clue. I'm going to tap down your only black source. That sounds like a lot of fun. Basically, it's like, there's a little Gloamveil Trackers package where if you're not paying too much cost to put clue making cards in your deck, you can have this pretty good 4-drop. And as I said, like much earlier in this review, there really isn't a generically good green 4-drop in Rev right now. So this could be like the one that you play. Sacrifice. So as I said, we are losing what's it called? Deadly Dispute. We still have Sundering the Fleet. We still have Bone Shards. We actually are getting a second Bone Shards and Blood Soliloquy if you wanted to play 8 Bone Shards for some reason. I've already mentioned Hunted Starlet. It's like makes you creatures that sacrifice yourselves as you make your other sack fodder. But the biggest thing for sacrifice in the set is Soul Survivor. 3 mana 1/1. When it enters, you get a Scion. And whenever this or another creature you control dies, drains your opponent from 1. Sacrifice has been leaning on Spiraling Such for so long, they've really wanted to have a second Blood Artist effect. They don't have one. It's a huge problem for the deck. Now they have one. It's not great. It's 3 mana. It's a 1 toughness creature. Dies to a Stiff Breeze, but it is another Blood Artist. It lets you do the sacrifice thing, which is kill your opponent. Is this going to make sacrifice good? No! There's a couple cards in the set that I think might be worth building around, but I couldn't tell you what the deck looks like. First one is Stilla Opulent Paragon. 3 mana 2/3 Noble. When she enters, get a treasure. When she dies, you draw a card and lose a life. And whenever an ability of another small creature you control triggers, you can counter that trigger to either get a treasure token or draw a card and lose a life. So there is a deck going around that uses Bleed from the Cause, Vardo's Scalpel, Disciple Darker Powers. Then that deck could slot in a Stilla. That deck I think is usually like blue-black, but you can make it white-black or Esper. Vardo's Scalpel is certainly the card that works best with Stilla. You play Stilla, get your treasure, you attack with Vardo's Scalpel, you immediately counter the lose 2 life ability to draw a card and lose 1 life instead. That's huge. The enter trigger of Disciple of Darker Power, if you mill a card and lose life, that's a nice like low impact trigger to counter. Um, if you're in white, you might as well play Containment Seraph because you can counter the leave trigger of Containment Seraph. Now that's tricky. You need to have both of these triggers on the battlefield, and then the Seraph specifically needs to die. Um, but it's a cool interaction. They don't get the cards in life off the Seraph. That's really nice. I will say that still is also just like a completely reasonable card to unearth. Like if you're a black-white version of this deck and you got these two good 3-drops and you got 1-drops and you're filling your graveyard with for Bleed for the Cause Cellular cards, maybe you play the Helping Hand from Valir, whose name escapes me. And you can like unearth Stilla, which is I think a very reasonable way to use this card. It's just a good value 3-drop. I'm kind of excited to build this deck. There's a really good life gain payoff in this set. Ephraim High Alderman, the 2-mana 2/2 with no pronouns. Ephraim has lifelink, and in your end step, you gain 3 more life. You get to unearth a creature with a finality counter and a lifelink counter, which is pretty crazy. So I just need to gain one. Ephraim, if Ephraim can get in and gain the 2 life, I just need to gain 1 more life. Blightstalker is probably the easiest way to gain 1 life in Rev. If you can defeat a Pact Beyond Death, that'll get you there easily. The Tick token off Catabolist works with this, and Catabolist is already a card you kind of want to fill your graveyard while you're filling your graveyard so Ephraim can unearth things. Life Hacker, obviously, is the life gain payoff we have right now. I don't see it. You don't have enough, like, good cards that incidentally gain you life. It's mostly you have to go out of your way for it. But this is a card to look out for. It could definitely start doing something soon. 2-mana card that can repeatedly get back 3-mana cards. I mean, that's something I'll jump through some hoops to do. And the last card I want to talk about is Something in the Soil. 3-mana sorcery. You get a soil counter, then you mill twice the number of soil counters you have, that many cards, and then you get back a permanent of that mana value from graveyard to the battlefield, and you can play any number of these cards. This card is super cool. So what does your Something in the Soil deck look like? Well, you want a lot of Something in the Soils, and you want a lot of permanents. And because the value is covered. The ramp, it's covered. Something in the Soil does all of that for you. Card selection, that's covered. What you need to do is affect the board, not die, kill your opponent once you've Something in the Soil like 3 or 4 times. So basically, I think you want the entire rest of your deck to be permanents, and you want them to be permanents that affect the board and mess your opponent. I think your deck is probably Obzon, and I think at the 2-drop slot, Exorcist of Errors looks excellent here. That's a great permanent to get back with this. Sanctum of Repression looks great. That's a permanent you can get back. Obviously, by the way, you want even mana value permanents. You don't need any 3-drops, because Something in the Soil is your 3-drop. You probably do play Husk Forger, and you can get back a land with the first Something in the Soil, although you don't really need to ramp in this deck, because you just need to play more Something in the Soils. Although you will want to ramp anyway, because your deck does have 6-drops in it. Anyways, Permanent Husk Forger, 2-drop, Exorcist, Sanctum, up at 4. You don't need 3 because something, but 4 drops. Meteor Hellion is probably the best one, although you could play Life Hacker. Then at 6, Sylvia is probably your best option, although you could play Not Found One, which is a weird uncommon from Errors in the West that kills one of your opponent's creatures if you have a stocked graveyard, which you will. Up at 8, you play Tesh. Tesh is certainly the best 8-drop you could get. And then once you get to 10, I think you play the 1 of Record Desync, because that means you never mill out. Or you mill out very slowly, because once you get back Record Desync, that shuffles half of your graveyard back into your library, so you can keep Something in the Soil. Is this deck good? If your opponent plays a Crucible Burning Sun, you do lose the game on the spot. But assuming they don't do that, this seems like a really cool deck that might actually have some legs. I'm excited to try it out. And that is the end of this review. Thank you for being here. I'm super excited for this set. It's been in the works for a while. It's a really polished set, been through field test. As one of the field test managers, I kind of really respect any set that's been through field test and been under that level of scrutiny. And so I got lots of decks to brew. I got lots of things to be excited about. Congratulations to Catalyst. Long live Revolution Custom Standard. Long live the Curators. And good night.